Dr. Theresa B. Harrison came to Gainesville in 1989 from Sarasota in order to attend the University of Florida, where she obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science, a Master's of Education, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Educational Leadership, Policy, and Foundations. Dr. Harrison taught high school in Hardy County, Florida, and was the education coordinator at Camp Ikeletu, a wilderness education program for boys located in the Ocala National Forest. Currently, she is the executive director of Peaceful Paths Domestic Abuse Network, the certified domestic violence center serving Alachua, Bradford, and Union counties. She serves on the board of the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence and is involved in numerous local community projects that address family violence, homelessness, and social justice. Her passion is for social change work that creates advocacy for issues related to violence against women. She lives in Gainesville along with her husband, Jim Harrison, a local artist, and their son, Nate. Welcome, Theresa.
Thank you.
I am so glad to finally have you here. I've been a huge fan of what you do for a long time. And
appreciate that.
I went to your website and I've been kind of researching, and one of the things that I found particularly interesting was kind of the evolution that got us to Peaceful Paths in around 2000. But can you take us back to the 70s where the original organization began?
Well, much like many of the domestic violence centers around the state, Peaceful Paths was started off as a grassroots organization that was part of the Refugee Information Network. And RIN, as it was called back in the 1970s, was really a series of telephone hotlines where people could call in and get information about how they could access service for a variety of issues surrounding violence against women. And the battered women's movement was really picking up speed at that point, and Gainesville decided to go ahead and create their own center, which eventually became SPARC, the Sexual and Physical Abuse Resource Center, back in 1978. And they created a big enough organization to warrant having a shelter, had a 24-hour helpline, and really we just grew from there. And in 2000, when the board of directors hired me on as the executive director, they were in the midst of trying to realign the community with what the mission of the organization was. And part of that was getting rid of the acronym and really trying to find a name that was more evocative and more indicative of what the agency actually did. And so they had a little contest amongst the staff, and Peaceful Paths was the name that rose to the top, and we got a designer on board, came up with a new identity, and launched that in October of 2000.
That's a great story. Now, I want to go over things in some detail, but can you kind of walk us through the many, many different services that Peaceful Paths provides?
Well, it's pretty amazing when you look at the fact that we're a pretty small organization in terms of, even for the nonprofit world, there's 27 staff who really provide about 23,000 individual services to people across the 3 counties that we serve, Alachua, Bradford, and Union, every year. And it includes everything from the 24-hour helpline, which is always answered by a trained advocate, the 30-bed emergency shelter, our 11-bed transitional housing program. We do outreach victim advocacy services in the courthouses. We do outreach counseling, support groups, children's programs. We have a very extensive violence prevention program. And then we have a range of volunteer opportunities, professional training, education that we do community awareness throughout those areas.
I should probably tell our viewers, if they hear any booms in the background, that's because we have a thunderstorm outside.
Thank goodness, thank goodness.
So if I'd known bringing you on would have brought the rain, I would have asked you a lot.
I'll come back every day, absolutely.
You know, I've got the advantage of having all these notes in front of me. You have to remember all this stuff off the top of your head. Who do you serve? I mean, what is your primary population that you serve? And I think you mentioned you have 3 counties. What determined that it was going to be those 3 counties?
Well, it's interesting. Florida is organized in a really great way around this issue. There are 42 certified domestic violence centers across the state, all of whom are part of the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And as those grassroots organizations developed over the years, the catchment areas kind of developed organically. At one point in our development, Peaceful Paths then Spark, served 11 counties here in North Florida, which is just an amazing amount of territory.
Right.
And when I came on board in 2000, we actually served Putnam County as well at that time. But they got their grassroots organization, Lee Conley House, up and running in 2003. So we were very happy to hand that service area off. But predominantly, those 3 counties, Alachua, Bradford, and Union, we serve adult and child victims of domestic violence. The majority of those are women, and they range in age, as you would imagine, from 18 to 75, depending on their needs, the station that they are in life, the place they are in life. They come to us with a variety of needs. And the domestic violence movement, which has really been keeping track of these kinds of statistics since the early 1970s, we find that it still rings true that about 90 to 95% of all victims of domestic violence are women. And that holds absolutely true with the demographics that we serve in this area.
How many people does your organization serve in a year or in the last year?
In a face-to-face capacity, we see about 1,000 people a year. We have another 15 to 2,500 hotline calls that we answer every year. Some of those are duplicate people, but sometimes we get a name, sometimes we don't.
Right.
And in shelter, it ranges from about 200 to 250 people each year. Shelter numbers have actually gone down, thankfully, over the past decade or so, because we've gotten a lot better at preventative and outreach services, so that we have much higher numbers in our outreach groups, in our outreach programs than we did a decade ago. And that has conversely meant that our shelter numbers have gone down because people are accessing services earlier in the situation, where they aren't waiting to the point where their only option really is to go into an emergency shelter situation.
And that's really good news.
It is.
Are you aware of crime statistics? I mean, what are the numbers in terms of how large a problem is domestic abuse?
It's funny, people often ask us how big a problem is domestic violence in Alachua County. It's a great place to live, and people don't often think of some of the social injustices as being a huge issue here. But as we know from the discussions around our homelessness issue, there's still a lot of issues that we have to deal with in this county, and domestic violence is one of those. On average, we see about 2,000 arrests for domestic violence in that Tri-County area. Now, of course, that doesn't take into account the number of incidents that occur where police are never called, or where police are called but there isn't enough to warrant an arrest at that time. And if you look at homicide numbers over a decade, between 1995 and 2005, Alachua County was actually number 5 in the state of the number of domestic violence homicides per capita.
Wow.
And so that was a statistic that was pretty shocking to us. But when we look back and think about some of those situations where our community has really been brought front and center around issues related to domestic violence, unfortunately they have been some of the worst that we've seen.
Yeah, we would like to think Alachua County is progressive and immune to some of that, but it's just not the case.
And the reality is that they are progressive and they are very supportive of the issue. The problem is that we're still seeing the situation where, because of the tolerance that has occurred over a many generational situation in our country, not just here in Alachua County, we're still fighting kind of an uphill battle, but we are definitely making headway.
Right. Let's talk about some of the, I want to kind of dig into the services themselves.
Sure.
Now, you mentioned you have an emergency shelter and you have transitional.
Yes.
Who can take advantage of the emergency shelter? What is that there to do?
Emergency shelter is really for anyone who finds themselves in need of immediate assistance because of the danger that's in their lives. So really, when a person calls the helpline and inquires about the emergency shelter, the 3 questions that we ask is, first, are you safe to talk? We want to make sure that they're in a place where they can freely talk about the situation without putting themselves in further danger. Then we ask them, what is the situation for them right now? Is it in a really a situation where they have no other option but to leave? And if so, do they have any other place that would possibly be safe for them to go?
A relative or
a relative?
friend
Do they possibly just need a bus ticket back to their hometown? Their abuser possibly moved them to this area, or they want to reconnect with family elsewhere. And then finally, we talk to them about whether or not it would be safe for them to actually come to shelter. Shelter is a confidential location. However, we've been in the same location in this county for over 30 years.
Right.
So we just want to make sure that we're not going to put them or any other resident that's in shelter in danger. So once we determine that they do live in the area, they do have a safety need, and they do have an immediate need for shelter, then we're going to go through a process of screening to find out, can they get to us? Do we need to provide transportation to them? Do we need law enforcement to intervene to help with that? And really get them into shelter as quickly as possible.
And you will make that connection with law enforcement, or?
If the victim that's on the phone wants us to, absolutely. One of the things that, we don't require anyone call law enforcement, because we know that many times it could exacerbate the situation, and we don't want to escalate violence that's already occurring. But if the victim feels comfortable and says, yes, I'm in a rural area and I do have a transportation issue, law enforcement can be a phenomenal tool in helping us make sure that they get the safety that they need.
And I imagine you have a very close working relationship with local law enforcement.
We do, and in fact, I can say that we are probably the premier county in the state of Florida when it comes to how domestic violence centers and their law enforcement partners work together. We've had tremendous support both from the domestic violence unit at Gainesville Police Department, as well as Sheriff Darnell, in making sure that this is an issue that's not only treated with the utmost priority, because it is a priority crime, but also it's done in such a way that victim safety really is the cornerstone of the work that they're doing. And I can't say enough about our law enforcement partners and how well they have worked with us to make sure that this issue is handled appropriately.
Now, you mentioned folks will call in on the hotline. Is that the
Helpline
crisis
or
line,
helpline?
Okay. Who staffs that hotline? Are these volunteers? Are they staff people?
They are paid staff. They are trained advocates. So we have a 24-hour staffing pattern at the shelter, 365 days a year. So if you call, you're never going to get an answering machine. It's never going to ring more than 3 or 4 times. You're going to have an advocate that's going to be there to be able to answer your questions. And if you happen to speak a different language, we have access to language lines through the phone system, as well as TTY services for those who are deaf, and so we want to make sure that we can provide all of the service and access that people would need.
I know you also have a victim advocacy component. Can you tell me the services that your victim advocacy people provide?
Sure.
Yeah.
Victim advocacy is really kind of a relatively new invention on the front of dealing with issues like domestic violence or sexual assault. And it's funded through the Victims of Crime Act at the state and federal level. It's a great program because it allows us to actually work where victims are coming in for services. So we have victim advocates that work at the courthouse, thanks to a great partnership with our clerk, Buddy Irby. He provides an office space where our advocates can actually go and sit and help women or men who are coming in to fill out injunctions for protection. And we can aid them through the process as far as letting them know what they can expect. We do some safety planning, talk about what other services, and make referrals for anything that might be necessary. Talk to them about victims' compensation, including relocation services. And then we will be in court on the date of their hearing, so that if they need an advocate to just stand there and be that moral support, we can be that for them. And we do that in all 3 counties.
Do you have any interaction with our victim advocacy program?
Absolutely.
Do you?
Absolutely. So we work with Loretta Golden and the folks over at the health department that are working through the Alachua County Office of Victim Services, as well as through the state's attorney's office. And the university police department also has victim advocates. It's a really great community here as far as how that group of people tend to work together, because we simply share the same people. So whether the client accessed the sheriff's office first or they came to us first, we're going to be able to make those referrals back and forth as they need services.
Now, I imagine that frequently when someone has to take advantage of your services that there are children involved. Is it common for women to show up with children to the shelter?
Absolutely. Yeah. About half the people we see in shelter every year are children.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And do you have particular programming or services available to children?
We do. It's one of the priorities for our agency, and I think because I have a background in education and I spent a great deal of time working with kids in crisis, it was kind of a natural progression for me to come to an organization that was focused on women and children in crisis. And so we really have made it a priority to have a very strong child advocacy program, both in the outreach and in the shelter services. So we provide the same kinds of support groups for kids that we do for moms at a little different level, but we talk a lot about safety. We talk a lot about handling our feelings, how we deal with the anger and conflict resolution that kids need to understand. And then we do some basic things for those under 4, like just providing childcare so that mom can actually attend group and not have to worry about where she's going to put her little ones while she's getting the help she needs.
So you've got these programs for children. Obviously, you have kind of support for adults. I mean, do you provide counseling? Do you make referrals?
Both.
Oh, okay.
We are very lucky because we do have kind of a 3-prong approach to how we deal with the counseling issue. The core of our counseling services are the support groups that we offer, and the model of support groups in domestic violence is something that you'll see in a lot of other types of social services, in that we really do feel like an empowerment-based model where you let people talk about their issues in the company of people with similar issues who work together to find solutions, facilitated by someone who has maybe a little bit more information and some access to resources. So our support group facilitation process is one of, I think, the best, because it really does allow people, especially in domestic violence that is so isolating for victims, and who often feel like they're the only one going through this, or people won't understand, or they'll blame them for what's going on. It really provides that forum for women to come together, and women especially, because we are so social by nature. You put them together in a group and they're going to find a way to problem solve. They're going to reach out to each other and really make the work happen. And so for us, it's a real pleasure to be able to see those things occur. And then for families that come to us that maybe have a little more in-depth issue than what a support group could facilitate, we do individual counseling, and we contract with 2 great local providers here who actually do the services at our office. They're phenomenal folks. One is a law enforcement officer. One is an advocate who worked for us years ago, went on, got her master's in licensure, and has come back in this capacity. And we're just really fortunate to be able to have those services that we can refer people to. And then if we have families that even those counselors feel like they need something more than what they can handle, whether it's a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue, then we have a great base of folks here in the community that we can access. Everyone from Dr. Paul Wheeler and Butch Jones to the folks at the Crisis Center in Meridian, where we can really reach out and say this family needs more than what we're able to provide.
You mentioned substance abuse. Is that a common occurrence that folks come to you with that problem? Or?
What we know through child welfare research is that the co-occurrence of domestic violence, substance abuse, and mental health is very common. And there's a lot of theory as to why that occurs. We do know that substance abuse is often a tactic that batterers use to keep their victims kind of in check. The idea that if we're doing drugs together, then you're less likely to leave because you're dependent upon me for yet another thing in your life, or it's another thing that I can hold over you to make sure that you don't leave the situation. But we know that untreated mental health and substance abuse go hand in hand. If people don't have access to the right services, then they're going to medicate in the way that they need to be able to survive the day. And so we often see those 3 issues in tandem. And in fact, we have a subcommittee here that's part of our child welfare redesign project that really is looking at those 3 things intersecting and how we can work together to develop a protocol that really works for the families we're intervening with.
So having a substance issue does not preclude you being able to go to the shelter or receive
Absolutely
services?
not. And one of the things that we encourage women who do have substance abuse issues when they're at shelter is to let us help you find the resources you need to address this. We know that many times they're not able to address the domestic violence issue until they address the substance abuse or mental health, and we want to make sure that they get to the point where they're able to do that.
Now, you mentioned that some of the statistics were looking good. They were going down.
Right.
I know you have violence prevention programs,
Yes.
and I assume that's part of the reason why we have that good news. Can you tell me about those programs?
Absolutely. Violence prevention, I think, is probably the area that I have been most excited about in this work coming into it over the last 11 years, in that I really do feel it's critical for us to work all sides of the issue. And we've done a phenomenal job over the past 30 years with figuring out how to do intervention, both from the victim side and from the batterer side. But the reality is, it was only a few years ago that we started really to address how do we prevent this from happening in the future. And the Centers for Disease Control declared domestic violence an epidemic in 1998, which a lot of people never heard about. A lot of people said, well, you know, what does that actually mean? But it brings with it a whole different level of funding. And one of the things that they did is they spent 5 years trying to determine what were the strategies that would really work to create primary prevention that would inhibit initial incidents of domestic violence. And in 2003, they launched a program called Delta, which was really aimed at creating change in violence prevention. And so we were one of 6 pilot centers in the state of Florida that got the funding. So we are in our 4th round of funding with the CDC for the Delta project that's aimed at creating a curriculum that is Healthy Relationships 101. How you teach kids to interact, how you teach them mutual respect, what gender equality looks like, the different kinds of oppression that exist in our society and how we handle those. What does fair fighting look like? What does conflict resolution look like? And it's really aimed at a population of kids that, while they're starting to form relationships, most of them haven't had the long-term relationships starting yet that they're going to carry into their adulthood. So we really want to intervene with them before any of those initial incidents of dating violence or relationship violence have occurred. And it's a phenomenally successful program. We serve anywhere between 1,500 and 3,500 kids a year in about 18 different sites around the county.
That's incredible. And this kind of ties into, you do other community awareness and kind of intervention programs, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
We do a lot of professional education, a lot of intervention on a different scale. We're very involved in pilots. We like to be the person that invents the wheel rather than using someone else's.
Bleeding edge.
Exactly. Which sometimes, every time I come in and say, I had a brainstorm, the staff kind of groans because they know it's going to be work, but at the same time, they know that we've really been able to create some great stuff out of it. Everything from our financial literacy program and economic empowerment program, which is a national model now for domestic violence centers, where we have the first ever individual development account program where women go through a financial literacy curriculum and they start saving. We match their savings 2 to 1, and then when they complete the savings program, they have a nest egg of about $2,200 where they can go out, buy a home, rent an apartment, get a car, go back to school. It's just phenomenal. And then we have the SOURCE program, the Intermittent Partner Violence Assistance Clinic at the university. That's a partnership of the Levin College of Law, the College of Medicine, and Shands and ourselves, where we're outreaching to victims that might not otherwise be screened through those Shands clinics. And it's just a phenomenal process of seeing how the community comes together around this issue.
You know, I've heard this about you. It's a shame you can't muster any enthusiasm for what you do.
Yeah, I know. It is sad that I just don't have a lot of energy to devote to things. But you know, the reality is, I feel very passionate about this work because I really do see that it makes a difference. You know, our goal is to create safety, create support, and a path to self-sufficiency for women who otherwise don't have a voice. And that, to me, is the thing that is the most inspiring about the work, is because you're out there doing what you do every day, knowing that, you know, you really are making a difference in the lives of people who otherwise may go unnoticed.
Throughout this show, we've been putting up your website and your phone number.
Oh,
and,
great.
I had a chance to look at your latest newsletter, and
Yes.
it's really terrific. And
Wonderful.
I saw the wish list, and I'm thinking about the things that I have around the house that I can bring
Yes.
over. I wanted to, before we run out of time, though, I wanted to get an idea of how you're funded. I know it's a variety of ways. You mentioned VOCA,
Victims of Crime Act.
Right. So it sounds like you get federal, local.
We do. If there's a
give
pot
me
of
some
money
those.
available, we'll go after it. We really are funded in a three-way split between our federal and state funders, the Domestic Violence Trust Fund, which is administered through our state coalition, HUD funding, VOCA funding. We get local United Way funding and CAP funding through the Alachua County, as well as the generosity of so many donors who come to us on an annual basis and say, we support the work that you're doing.
Now, I know we're almost out of time, but I know that in 2009 you all had a pretty dramatic event
We
at your
did.
office. Your building burned down.
It was a test in crisis management.
Yes. Tell us what happened there, and I think it ended up being really quite a good story in many ways.
You know, there's always a silver lining, and sometimes it's really hard to see what it's going to be. But the reality is that in February of 2009, our outreach offices on 53rd Avenue burned to the ground. It was a total lost fire, but thanks to GFR, the two things that survived were my van and my finance office. So, you know, we had everything we needed to be up and running in 7 business days. I can't believe the number of people who came out to support us. We literally had to buy 10 folding tables to open our new office when we moved in 7 or 10 days later. And so it was just great, the community outpouring. And, you know, 16 months after the fire, we moved into a 9,000 square foot phenomenal location where we have everything that we could possibly want in terms of how you lay out a space for victim services, including a really nice community room that if people want to use it, please call us. You know, it's fully wired for all of the technology that you would need to put on a great presentation or educational program. And, you know, we feel very, very fortunate that the community capital we've been storing over the years really paid off in a way that we never envisioned we needed it to, but at the end of the day, it worked great.
Do you mind me asking what was the total that you managed to raise?
Between grants, in-kind donations, and cash donations, it was right around $300,000.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it worked.
How many bricks did people buy?
We sold just over 150 bricks. We still have about 150 left, so if people are interested in supporting us that way, you can purchase a brick for the path in front of our office. They're $100. You can go to the website and click the Buy a Brick button and get one today.
Well, it's an amazing organization that you have. I've been very aware of it, and I have the privilege of hearing you every year as you come for your CAP funding at the county and talk to the county commissioners about what you do, and it's just such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
We used to write letters to each other a lot. A lot of the notes, they were just really dark.
Expressions of anger. When he was mad, he hit things.
Said something to me about killing himself.
You have to take it seriously. The risk is too great.
You have to try and help them get help.
Tell somebody, tell an adult, counselor, parent, whatever.
What are you going to do? Let them destroy themselves? I don't see much of a choice at all.